Excuse me while I do it. A Tom Sainsbury boomer dad. I'm looking for my notes about.
Who's Tom Sainsbury?
Are you joking?
I don't know who Tom Sainsbury is either.
Pardon me. You need to get him in for your next podcast.
We don't have kids, I suspect.
No.
This is like New Zealand comedy royalty.
Yeah.
I might recognise him then.
You would recognise him. So
Yeah,
he
you would.
was in
Is this
Wellington
mine?
Paranormal as yes. He was in Wellington Paranormal as it wasn't me. Oh no, it was me because I phoned in advance.
I recognise him. I wouldn't say I...
really?
Oh, he's so funny. Because you're
Wow.
also, neither of you are big Instagram people, right?
No.
Yeah,
Oh,
that would
okay.
partly be why.
That's his
My Instagram feed
main
is how to fix broken BMWs, food, and random aircraft stuff. And movies.
Oh, yes.
Lots of movies.
The only exposure I get to Instagram and TikTok is when it's a meme enough that someone makes a 2-hour deep dive discovery documentary on YouTube about where the trend came from and why it exists.
Oh,
No dog stuff?
No dog stuff, no.
Oh, you're missing out.
I don't know that
Abby should have
dog
her own
content would work.
account.
Yeah, I did think about it, but it would...
And like just his arm crawl.
all the
Like
comments,
he's still in the arm.
all the comments would just be, is your dog dead?
Yeah.
So,
A heart rate monitor. Like a live heart rate.
What does it mean to have a human in the loop?
Human in the loop. Human in the loop. What in the world is a human in the loop?
Being a human in the loop.
AI in the loop. Humans in charge.
Welcome to Human in the Loop. Melissa ChanGreen is an awarded broadcast journalist, TV presenter, writer, podcaster, and passionate public advocate. I didn't bang on having to say that out loud fast. Passionate public advocate. Melissa's newest endeavour is School Shorts, a podcast which centres around global research and experts and parents' approach to learning and children's literacy. Do you feel that covers it?
Yeah, I think
And mother of
so.
two.
We're kind of just helping parents to help their kids to read is kind of an easy way to put it as well. But obviously there's a lot of things that feed into that in the learning journey, and so it's kind of extended to all of those things that as parents and as teachers and whānau that we are navigating in the school journey.
Do you find that your passion for this came through having kids, or is it something that you've always looked at and gone, I can see there's something kind of breaking away from when we were at school? And I say we loosely because, well, you're more the baby of the group, I think. You have yet to cross the 40 threshold.
Just newly graduated from primary school.
Quite a change from last week's podcast where Derek didn't know what the Matrix was.
Oh, yeah, we're making you feel young now.
Yeah. Oh,
you guys felt like
Flattery
granddads
will
last
get
time.
you everywhere. Keep going.
Yeah, it was my kids kind of coming home, or my older kid coming home talking about what they were doing in school, and I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. These acronyms, like PMP and that sort of thing, are not what I'm familiar with. So, yeah, that kind of did spark the idea. And it was actually sitting down at one of those like mini kids tables with him one night once, everything had happened with AM being disestablished, that he was talking to me about school, and he said, Mum, what are you going to do next? And I was like, I might just help people figure out what you're doing at school. And then my husband looked at me from across the kitchen bench and was like, now that's interesting. And here I am.
For the benefit of anyone who doesn't have children or might not have stepped into
Or is a child in Derek's case.
for anyone who's
was
still a
born
child.
fully formed in a pod.
Well,
Hamish's case.
I don't know when. I don't want to make assumptions. Have either of you two stepped into a New Zealand primary school since you left primary school? Do you know what it's like now? Or what do you remember of primary school?
I've been a guest speaker. And I had to explain.
primary school?
I was the original. Explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old, because like I had my standard spiel, and then I have to like age adjust it, and I had to like look up. I got a kids dictionary, and I tried to find the words I was going to use, and I was like, oh shit, I need to change all those words.
What's the appropriate level of?
And then I got a kids thesaurus. Those exist. First off, amazing, but yeah, they're for teachers.
Were you talking about like digital?
It was kind
education?
of because I grew up in Zimbabwe and lived like traveling back and forth between Sri Lanka. My parents are teachers, and we were dropped into the third world country in my life, which is South Auckland.
Yeah, but you were in high school when you moved here, right?
I was 8, 9.
Oh.
Yeah, so I did my last 2 years of primary school in Papatoe, and then intermediate in Papatoe, and then high school in Papatoe, and it was the freaking Wild West. Yeah, I think going back to that original question, I'm kind of curious to understand, was the reason you felt that you wanted to do the shorts project, or it's business now, was it because you felt like the school wasn't supplying a quality enough
information?
Yeah, and also were you concerned that the education level, like you wanted the information to make sure that your child was getting the right level of
Yeah, no, in fact, I think there are so many schools doing a really good job of communicating to parents about what is happening, because there are a lot of changes that are happening. But I feel that I was in a position where I have worked in media and how to distill quite complex information and deliver it to an audience who might know nothing about it. And I feel people are consuming media in different ways, not necessarily through school newsletters and that sort of thing. So I thought, if I can break down some information and put it out in a digital sense that's in a short form video, or, you know, kind of easy to understand TikTok or something, then we have a greater chance of reaching parents who might not read newsletters, might not go to parent information evenings. And when it comes to equity of education, you have some who have the resource to be able to afford their children extra tuition if they're falling behind at school, and some who don't. And so if we arm those parents who don't have the resource to pay for tuition with the information to do that themselves, then at least we're making some strides towards starting children on a more even footing when they begin school. So it was kind of, I guess, a wee bit purpose-driven and a little bit like I didn't feel that schools weren't doing a good job, but I felt like the way in which we consume that information has changed, and that there needed to be some adaptation for that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm on, I think, I have 3 school apps now, like the modern setting. So I have an app I have to log into if a student is absent. We get like sheets home and they're full of these strategies, and my kids are like, can you help me with this math strategy? I'm like, but this isn't what I was taught. And I don't want to teach you the wrong way of doing it. Or I'll start to help them and they're like, that's not right. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I line up the numbers. I add those ones there. You carry the one. They're like, that's not right. You hold up your fingers and you go like this. And I'm just like, this is not what we knew.
Yeah.
There's so much information from schools, and the amount of emails, like you could miss an entire, even to try and stay on top of the information coming from schools, you can miss a lot of it. It's hard. I'm curious to know what Hamish was like as a child. This was all a setup to try and figure out what Hamish was like as a child.
He was born fully formed in a pod.
Born fully formed in a pod. I mean,
clone.
no, I was.
You pull down his eyelid, there's those dots from the 6th day.
I mean, I don't know if my memories are real. I could have been born fully formed from a pod and just had memories of a childhood injected.
But like literacy in your primary school era.
So I actually have a really, I mean, it's common for the people
If
at my
you
school,
say you were
but odd.
homeschooled, that is going to explain so much shit.
Almost. So when I was 6, we moved over to England to a village near Gloucester, and they have Church of England schools, which are supported by the church, but then also government oversight.
And Henry
and
V.
they're really small, right? So the primary school I went to, I think they had 3 classrooms total.
Wow.
And you'd share the same teacher with multiple years. So
you know they do this in Russia? Yeah, their education system, the teacher stays with you all the way through. Which
They
is
do that at
fascinating.
Steiner as well. We live close to a Steiner. And
There's actually been a lot of research to say that to have a teacher for more than 1 year is really beneficial for children.
And I can attest Russians are good at math, code, and own goals.
right.
So
and pod people. I mean, not pod people.
yeah, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, that's really fascinating.
So, and I don't have a lot of memories of my time there, right? And because I don't know any, like I haven't maintained connections with anybody from there, you don't get like that re-engagement that would trigger maintaining those memories. I have a few impressions, but I don't ever remember particularly struggling to learn stuff, and that makes me pretty bad at like assessing teaching methodology, right? Because you could, like, the way I learned to read was my mum put a book in front of me and I sort of figured it out mostly by myself.
Of course you
know?
do.
Yeah. But that's actually parents of children who learn like that. It's actually just as important that they kind of understand what's going on, because there is, I've only seen figures from the States, but there are higher incidents of really kind of implicit learners, so learners that just pick up stuff really by themselves, dropping out when it comes to high school because they've
Not
kind of
engaged.
become disillusioned with school. They're not being extended in the way they
So
should.
much wasted potential growing up. Saw that all over the place. It was basically like some kind of either, just bored out of their mind and, causing trouble, idle hands, or enough factors in their environment, like difficulty at home or need for income, that aptitude, all the pressure was loaded on them.
Yeah.
So they had to leave at 16 to get a job
Yeah.
because there was no one else in the family that was kind of able to do that. So much, there's
And
so much.
neurodiverse students too, right? That have an incredible way of thinking that can be, really beneficial to business and all sorts of industries, but it doesn't necessarily always fit that school system.
Yeah.
So,
Interestingly, we
yeah.
had one chemistry teacher that had ADHD, which was very interesting. It was the kids are like, "Miss, what are we doing?" Oh, where'd she go?
I'm conjuring up, like, who was the Miss Frizzle? Remember the Magic School Bus?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Very similar. So I remember very distinctly one double period that we had geography. We walked up to the classroom. She walked up to me and a bunch of the other class members, and she had an empty coffee cup. And she was like, "I'll be back with some worksheets." She just disappeared for 2 hours. The bell rang, and she came back. No worksheets, full coffee cup. And I'm like, "Oh, wow, how do we get out of this?" And that would happen all the time. It was quite fascinating. But it was an interesting thing because, I think self-directed, like in those environments, you actually end up being relatively self-directed. There's a lot of times we weren't strictly supervised. And the way that shows up in real life is whenever there's uncertainty, my group of friends from high school deal with uncertainty very well. So because they're
not expecting someone to come back.
Grown up
They
with
just grew up with
uncertainty.
uncertainty. Like, is the teacher coming back? Is like,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of variation.
As I dropped my bonus son, who's 16, at school today, he's at Avondale College, and I said, I'm going to be interviewing Melissa today, and this is the topic. And he's autistic, and he has incredibly smart, reading it too, struggles with handwriting. And so I asked him kind of like what was his take on education and how it interfaces with tech and stuff. And he kind of said what you're saying. He said, the problem that I see, and I recorded it, so I might have to pull it up and show you later, teenagers all have this low-grade hibernating depression. And I'm like, oh, that sounds bleak. But he was like, no. What I mean is we now have autonomy and we don't need to be told what to do. So when we have all of this being told what to do and being told what to learn, a whole lot of us are going to be bored, and we don't want to be told how to learn, and we don't want to be told what to learn. So then I started to go into, okay, well, you know enough about AI and technology. Do you think that the potential personalisation of AI tools would help at a high school age? But if we pull it back to primary school kids, they're being told how to learn or instructed in the way that we feel is best for them to learn. It's not suiting everybody.
I mean, I was a really, this will be surprising, opinionated child.
No, you don't say.
Didn't listen to advice from very many people. And I definitely felt like I didn't need guidance and I could figure stuff out, right? I turned out okay. But looking back, I was like, I didn't know anywhere near as much as I thought I did. I don't think that's a unique experience. I think most adults,
especially guys,
we
find out very late in life that we don't diddly.
Yeah. A lot of stuff I was pretty confident about turned out probably shouldn't have been all that confident. And there is one pattern doesn't fit all, right? And you need to figure out a way to help each child, but also they do need some guidance. Like some children will do well if you just sort of give them free range and let them figure stuff out. But a lot of kids will just sit in a mud puddle and slap the mud for, and that's good for an hour or two, but not good as preparation for adult life.
Yeah, you do learn something. There's science in slapping a mud puddle, but it's maybe not necessarily great for reading about science. But this is what a lot of teachers are saying, that actually being able to differentiate for different learners is something that they are using AI for a lot in primary school classrooms now. And so you can have the same topic, say you're learning about ice, and you can extend students. You can say, I need to extend this student to
Not
here.
the immigration department, just to be clear.
Yes, I should make that very clear.
We're talking about immigration and...
This isn't America.
When you see the Marines on your street, what do you do?
Melting ice. So I think that's one of the applications that teachers now are saying is really amazing in terms of AI, is being able to cater for a really wide range of students. And the other thing is, a teacher got in touch with me recently and said that they are able to, she had a lot of students in her class who were Jehovah's Witness. She said she didn't really understand much about that at all. And so she was running through some of the lessons in AI and making sure if it was appropriate.
Wow.
And she said some of the lessons turned out, she said that they could have been taken, they wouldn't have been appropriate. She said she just wouldn't have really known that unless she used
Because then the risk
AI.
is that the parents pull their child out of the lesson, right? And that child misses out on schooling.
Potentially, or they just disengaged from learning. We know that children engage more when they see themselves in what they're doing, or it's something that kind of spikes the dopamine and gets them really curious about something because it's something they're really engaged in. Like the kid who's super interested in Fortnite and can have whole reading material around Fortnite.
I also found that all through university and even high school, and my dad's talked about this as a math teacher, retired math teacher. Some of the analogies that are written are just like, they're not great. Like you're trying to explain gradient descent in calculus, and they're like, so this fish leaps through a pond. You're just like, this is not, like a roller coaster would be a better analogy for like gradient descent or, mathematical concepts. So like the ability to rewrite a general rule of thumb into an analogy that people would understand also has cultural context.
Yeah.
So
even just to update reference, right? Like textbooks can stay pretty old. Like, so the matron is dividing lard between 8 of the...
If Marion has 5 pennies,
if Henry V has 3 wives and he wants to divorce a 4th, but the church won't let him.
How many heads are going to roll?
How many heads will roll? So I think there's, I think one of the really interesting things is below the line. I sort of call AI below the line and above the line. Below the line is like sort of internal, like repurposing process or improving process. And then above the line is kind of like new opportunities. And I think even in education, we haven't even touched the sides on below the line, because we've always had a labor shortage, because you think every household has, in the last couple of years had between 3, 5, and 2 kids. So you're producing kids at a rate that dramatically, exponentially outnumbers teachers, because you don't have the same growth of teachers. I think being able to do simple things like lesson plans, marking, the visual understanding that comes with some of these models. I remember my parents outsourcing the marking to us as kids.
Really?
And we would get recruited. Yeah. And it was like, we need all of these marked by this point, and they would give us a answer sheet, and we would go through and triage the marking.
So you were an early AI system, kind of.
Basically. Yeah. I was outsourced data labeling. So in a way, yeah. But it's, there's so much work that's admin work in being a teacher.
Yeah.
And it's not actually the high value part of teaching, but it's the compliance part of teaching. And I think AI is particularly useful at that kind of stuff.
Well, there's also human error in marking,
So
right?
true.
So
And
if you write an opinion, but if you put it through AI, then you get some consistency.
Yeah.
And teachers have actually there's ESL, which is an online kind of marking or assessment program used in New Zealand, and teachers have been marking and then putting it through AI and getting remarkably similar results.
Do you recommend using it as a parent for your kids? Like
AI?
Yeah, is it sort of the same sort of potential?
I think so. I think if you have a child who, like my son now, is on learning first letters, so SAT, PIN, I could say, what are some revision activities I could do at home for these letters? Or write me a decodable book with using these letters and just CVC words, just consonant, vowel, consonant words, for a kid that is interested in soccer.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
And you just get a fully
it's amazing.
customized. Yeah. And I imagine, have you tried to help your kids with
Yeah,
homework?
I mean, covering the spectrum, the boys in my house are 9, 12, 13, 16, and a 21-year-old who just moved out. So that's a good decade of changing education. My youngest son is a really good example. He, you know, when you're the third boy of his brothers and the fifth of a blended family, he just refused to learn to read. He didn't want to. He wasn't interested. He didn't want to be told what to do. And if I had access to what he didn't want to do was sit down with me and read a book. But I got him into an external remedial program. You know, they go along, they do some worksheets, they gamify the learning journey. You know that at the end of the lesson you're going to get a fruit burst, and just because he's this kind of kid, instead of the small words, he skipped it. He refused to read for a year, and then at the end of the year he just picked up a chapter book and read it. Then I was just like, you but
Your household sounds fun.
it is fun.
You should make
They're
a
full
TV
of
show
lots of
about
really opinionated innate learners. Very neuro-spicy or neuro-fabulous, I think you put it the other day. But there were a lot of programs being offered. So Reading Eggs is one that most schools were putting out at a particular time. Steps Web is another one. There are so many platforms, and there's this weird trade-off where you trust that the school has suggested a platform. You're like, okay, I'm going to get my kid on it. You then have to give them a device. And I think that the thing that I have felt, especially through COVID, I keep going back to COVID learning era because it really changed the way that we became okay with putting kids on devices first. And for the 9-year-old now, he started school. He graduated kindergarten on a Zoom call, and he started his first day of primary school on a Zoom call. And I absolutely think that has impacted the way that first cohort they're coming to the end of primary school now. It really affected the way that they related to other kids, how they learned, how they self-directed. But also, it's a generation of millennial parents who are in usually very tech-first careers, not just in tech like as in us, but email-bound. And when you're parenting kids like this, you're like, well, I don't know how to sit down and do slow learning anymore. I'd rather just pull the device over and go, look, if you slay that dragon with this maths equation, you're going to win a bonus egg. And that has become the way that we've done it in our house. And I want to wind back from that, because I think that the opportunity to teach parents how to slow down is pretty huge.
Yeah.
My high school son's now going to a no device school, which I love.
You don't want to undercut the ability to learn first. That's the problem.
Something that comes up in equity in our industry is that some of the traditional advice for hiring are things like look at people's GitHub pages, look at people's self-directed learning, look at the sort of activities that they perform that shows that they're interested in technology and they're driving themselves. But part of the issue with that is that the ability to do that is a privilege, right? That you've got the space and the time and the device and either the support or at least the being left alone and having someone cook your meals for you enough that you can go off and do that learning as a child and carry that through into adulthood. And, whenever we talk about devices in education, that's always the thing that comes to mind a bit is like, how do you maintain equity as the complexity of infrastructure that needs to be provided goes up, right? So if we're now saying not only do you need a device, but you need a AI subscriction, they're not cheap, for a
And
lot of parents.
And it's not just the device of the subscription, it's the Wi-Fi.
Yeah. And also like the time to pay attention and give oversight, right? So that the kid, because AIs are better controlled than they used to be, but they're still pretty easy to wander into some weird areas, if you're interacting with them a lot, right? Like even adults, there have been stories of adults that have been driven to psychotic episodes through long conversational histories with ChatGPT. And
Let's face it, those people were headed that way anyway.
I mean, yeah. But,
No, you're talking about something I just heard about,
but like, so schizophrenic, and the ChatGPT suggested he come off as meds and take ketamine.
Okay, see, that's just that's sad.
And the conversation of like, I think that people are watching me. Oh, you are absolutely right. I see them too.
Yeah. And then I think about like the weird stuff that happened on YouTube a couple of years ago, where like the algorithmically driven shorts of like Elsa in really weird, disturbing adult situations that were driving. And like a combination of those factors means you probably can't just leave a kid with an AI for any length of time. And so that's another level of requirement for parents that maybe are time poor and don't have the ability to see their kids. How do you, like, is there any sort of recognition or planning around how to maintain equitability?
I don't know about equitability, but it's an interesting one about security too of children, because there's this meme going around which is, well, it's not a meme, sorry, it's a video that they're doing in a lot of American schools where they take a picture of the child and then ask them, what is it you want to be when you grow up? And really cute videos, these kids then turn around and they see themselves on the screen that, the AI has created them into a scientist or something. But what are the privacy concerns around schools taking photos of children and running them through AI? We haven't really had that discussion about what are the boundaries within schools that they can work with AI in our children as well. Sorry, I've totally moved it away from the equity.
It's a really good point.
It's probably like it's a salient point for anything to do with AI. I was watching Iran get a couple missiles through the Israeli defenses, and I was like, I think I only want to watch this on completely opposing news channels. So I was like, I turned on Al Jazeera and I was like, yep, that's probably real footage. And then I turned on BBC and I was like, yep, same footage. And then I checked Fox News and I was like, and they were talking about something completely pointless. And I was like, oh yeah, it must be real. But like, it's gotten to the point where I, as a technology professional, do not trust video output anymore. Where I'm like, like, is this actually as bad as everyone's reporting? And I check multiple news sources. I didn't used to do that. I used to just have BBC or one. Now I have like 10 different subscriptions to 10 different reliable news sources because of AI. And it's not just education and all the side effects. Like I only recently turned my Instagram account private because I was like, damn, this has already been scraped. And that you can definitely create an entirely synthetic image of me for the rest of my life. And you'll be able to progress it to any age and, models in 50 years. I don't even know how bank identity is going to work. So, you heard it here first, move all your cash into cash, stored in duffel bags because banks won't be able to.
I want a big gold bar.
I don't think we've really thought through the long-term implications of a lot of our actions. And I think education is one of those areas where there is a concern about like reliance on the technology as well as the privacy concerns. And I think the reliance, there's a lot of arguments that say, hey, we got calculators and we survived, right? And I don't think it's quite a fair comparison. Calculators couldn't talk back to you.
Yeah.
And calculators, if you add 8 + 8, they'll always give you the same answer and it'll be right.
Yeah.
Whereas, primary school teachers don't know everything. They're often relying on their reference sources to, if a kid asks them, why gravity or why plants or whatever, then they're going to be looking that up. And if
It's the same with parents, because sometimes I've been in situations where my son's like, Mom, why does the moon do this? And I've got some other parents, I'm like, and they're all looking at me like, I'm quite interested to hear what you say.
Alexa.
I mean, even the reference material, can be wrong, right? Like the traditionally taught reason why planes fly is wrong. It's not Bernoulli pressure. That's a whole different thing we can get into later. But like that was just the accepted teaching standard, right? That was how planes fly. But now with AI, like you can't even, like they'll potentially make stuff up, right? They are not very good at saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
And so if you ask them a question that's a little bit outside their core training set, they'll still present a very confident answer.
Yes.
And if that's then repeated with the authority of a teacher, that's going to be a pretty difficult standard of fact to correct.
I know a teacher who said that she is actually showing students, create an image for me, and then they're discussing all the ways in which it didn't meet the brief, or she's showing them when it doesn't come back with the correct answer, which I think is such a crucial lesson for our kids.
I heard a great one recently. I can't remember if it might have been even on your podcast. I can't remember where it came from, but getting students, and maybe it's more appropriate at a high school level, to tell AI to write a book review on a book and then to go and read the book and critique the AI review. But in that school environment, especially in primary school, you're blending like a physical learning and a creative learning. And there are facts and stuff. Okay, we can't argue what 8 + 8 is, but you absolutely can argue whether or not this thing a child created is art, or what do you think happens after you die? Like those are the kind of mind stimulating.
Whoa, that escalated very quickly.
This is the things that children are. It's like one day I remember when one of my sons was about 6, he came home and he was like, Mom, Josh's mother says that God created man, but I think that man evolved from apes. What do you think? And I'm like,
wow.
But he is free to think that too. And in there they find their personality and their capacity for reasoning. It's so much more than AI tell me whether or not I am right or wrong and what the fact is. It's bigger than facts.
There's a school in London, a private school, that just last year became complete AI teacher. And so they learn via headsets, and they are assessed for what are the subjects you're really good at and what are the ones you need to work more on. And so each student has an individualized program that will focus on the ones they need to more work on and then look at the other ones later in the year. But there are 2 subjects that they've decided AI will not teach and a teacher will come in and teach. Do you want to guess what those 2 subjects are?
Theology and sex ed.
Yeah.
Sex ed is one.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
and
Ding, ding, ding.
and art.
Art.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty interesting because,
That's a big, I was going to take the troll position that nothing that a child creates can be considered art because they don't have intentionality.
Was it not Picasso? Picasso that said that every child is an artist, and actually it is the becoming of an adult that stifles most people's creativity.
Yeah, I actually subscribe to that. Like,
Yeah.
I think as you become an adult, you reinforce the patterns that you've learned of your. That's what we define as experience.
We're less willing to fail at things, and to be a great artist, you've got to embrace failure.
And we're also much more inclined to repeat past behaviors.
Yeah.
So
Can I ask you guys a philosophical question? Like, this is one I really genuinely want your opinions on. What is the purpose of educating
Which
a
Die
child?
Hard movie is the best?
I mean, that's not a discussion.
Got
It's
it in there.
clearly the
What was
first
the question?
one.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
What was the question again?
What is the purpose of educating a child? child, let's say an under 16-year-old?
I think it's equipping them to achieve their potential for the betterment of society. So whatever each child's potential is going to be different, but to be able to be the best that they can be in the field that they choose to better society.
I would say that, stabilizing society is a good reason because an agency. I think education gives you agency.
Yeah.
Because it's liberating. There's this analogy that works really well, and I sort of have thought about it a lot. Back in the day, resources were taken. Yeah. So, with colonization and things, the world was revolved around physical resources. So physical gold, physical spices or whatever, and knowledge can't be stolen in the same way. So there's a huge amount of independence.
I like that.
Like once you have that knowledge, unless you suffer from a head injury or a motorcycle accident, it's in your head forever. And also that uniform common understanding of what has happened in the past and what the rules of nature are really important for things like fact checking. So I think the fabric of society, as we grow exponentially, the number of people on the planet, being able to have a common understanding of the world leads to more cohesion, I think, and education helps with that.
Yeah.
And it kind of just stabilizes things because when someone's like, look, the world is flat, you go, nah, is it? And that kind of stupidity doesn't get any traction.
Yeah.
If you've got a good education system.
Like the capacity for reasoning and critical thinking and to have discourse without...
To understand that there's something emotionally wrong with you, so you take a position that the world is flat instead of what you deep down probably actually know the world is not flat.
Yeah. You just want attention.
Yeah. Or you actually lack the education to understand that the world is not flat. It's like one of those two things. Because you're either being hyper-contrarian to provoke something like that and you don't realize the side effects of having a position like that on the world, or you genuinely don't understand it because someone didn't take the time to demonstrate or sort of ingrain that there are some common truths that are, and that's education, right? So,
What do you think?
So the anarchist in me says
the world is flat.
Public education is in service of capital.
Yeah,
Industrial revolution. It was
I don't disagree with that.
The upper class needed more educated labourers because it was no longer a task that could be done if you couldn't read, if you couldn't do math. We needed more educated people. But what's progressed since then is that as society, we have built ourselves quite a complex infrastructure and we're dependent on a lot of different things for our continued survival, right? Like petrol, electricity, food supply, infrastructure. There's a bunch of things that are quite complex that need to run at least the level they're running at now, or a bunch of people are going to have a really bad day for quite a long time. And those things need educated people to both maintain and improve. So it's now it's not just make a bunch of rich people more money. It's also maintain the systems that continue to
that we rely
on as a society, right? Although I do think, you said knowledge can't be stolen. True, but it can be taken advantage of. But also, and that's kind of a double-edged sword for capitalists, right? Like you want people to learn how to do stuff, but you don't want them to think too much, because if they think too much, they might be, well, maybe I can go into business for myself rather than get a job at the one company that runs the whole town.
Technology has made so many of our learned tasks so much easier, but I wonder if there are things that we've been offloading to tech that we shouldn't, because like wayfinding.
Yeah.
I don't have to use my brain too much, like remembering phone numbers, remembering critical dates. You just start to shed what seem low value tasks. But when I was listening to your episode about like mark making, like there are physical brain wiring connections that are never going to develop if a kid never has to know how to get from A to B because they can follow a phone.
Yeah.
I struggle to write Like,
Do you?
Yeah, because I don't write that often, so my handwriting's super messy. I'm on a keyboard so often, and I've like already have like pretty poor neural connections to my fingers.
You're going to become
my
like everything
handwriting is
everywhere
like-
all at once with just
Yeah.
like sausage fingers.
Precisely. If I don't write for a while, like I'm like, and it's as simple as like when I'm trying to write my name out on a rego form or something like that. I know how to spell my name. It's a complex name, but I do know how to spell my name. And then I end up having to pause because I'm like, okay, the next letter is, and like my hands have to move because I'm not.
It's partly muscle strength too, right? Like because it's a reasonably fine muscle control that you need to write. And if you're not doing that exercise all the time, you lose the muscle strength to do it. It's like playing guitar or other activities. So.
Do you think that's why adults kind of gravitate towards journaling as or like, you know, writing gratitude as an almost not just a meditative slow practice, but to actually, when you keep that skill up, it does sink that stuff into your brain deeper?
Well, yeah, I mean, the benefit of writing is that cognitive learning. So when you write something down, you're far more likely to actually learn it and go to bed that night and commit it to long-term memory. So for people, when they're writing a gratitude journal, it's the act of writing that means that gratitude starts to become part of your being, because you're not just, if you type a gratitude journal, it doesn't have the same impact.
So all of these gratitude apps,
And
bing, bing.
as a fully qualified doctor and neuroscientist, there's some interesting stuff in sort of meditation literature and Buddhism and about the brain being your entire nervous system rather than it just being the spit. So the act of moving, if you want to talk about how the brain activates, it's sort of believed that it enhances other parts of your brain and your memory doesn't just sit in one place. So when you're physically firing the neurons required to move your hand, you're firing a lot more neurons than you are typing. So there's actually a couple of Shaolin and like older Kung Fu style learning systems where you're doing a type of Tai Chi while you recite a whole bunch of information.
And then that commits it to memory much easier.
There's a belief that activating more muscles and activating more motion and more of your nervous system enhances your ability to remember stuff. And
that's why with teaching kids to read, quite often a lot of teachers are saying, okay, if we're going to teach you how to read from left to right on the page, you need to experience that with your body first, because otherwise if I tell you to start from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, how does a child know what top even means if they haven't actually experienced physically being on top and below something, or physically jumping from left to right? And so that's how a lot of teachers talk about those directional words as well.
And there's lots of older learnings. You know that exercise that all Ponspi yoga teachers tell you to like close your eyes and then feel different parts of your body?
Yeah.
That has like 80 to 90% of the same activation as actually physically touching or moving. It's the same as NBA players visualizing, shooting hoops before a game. Your brain has the ability to activate those things without moving. Yeah. So when you're doing meditation, the old school literature it's read between the lines, but it effectively says, think about your body's presence and what you're feeling physically, and then think about what you're grateful for, and you actually oscillate between the two. And there's a lot of belief that's so that your whole body remembers and is thankful for things rather than just your mind.
It's probably the same mechanism as the thing I remember about learning, which is that strong pain can help you remember facts. So if you're trying to remember something that you're really struggling to, have a really cold shower or something while you're thinking about the thing, and the pain, the body connects the pain experience to the fact that you're trying to remember, and it sort of embeds that.
Hey, teacher, you just come and stand with a knife right here?
That explains all the beatings I took as a child.
I know my 7 times tables now. Leave me alone.
No, I mean, like basic truth is, you avoid pain, so you will learn a lesson faster, right?
Digital designers of tech must know exactly that. Maybe they're smart enough to explain it, but haptic feedback. I mean, the day that I learned that the button on my phone was not actually a button and it was just a signal of vibration from the phone to make me feel like I completed a task.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's more about
Explain haptic
tricking your
feedback.
nervous system, because your brain's making a lot of assumptions based on some pretty limited signals. So there's a really good experiment that's reasonably easy to do, is if you get some bars, some little metal bars, and you make some of them a little bit cold and some of them a little bit hot, and then you put your hand over them, it feels like you're burning yourself, even though the bars are not that hot. But you don't have a lot of temperature sensing, and so if some parts of your hand are cold and some parts are hot, that's enough to trick your body into going, oh wow, that's a really, just comparatively, that's a really high temperature, and you'll feel like you're burning yourself.
But also remember, Hamish might be a robot. So they could have just skipped on the budget for heat sensors.
The other interesting thing, like, humans don't have a wetness sensor. We don't have any sense that tells us whether something is wet or not.
What?
We figure it out from the other senses that we do have. So we have a temperature sense, and so, you can tell if whether something's wet or not based on whether it's a bit colder, especially when you touch it, because then you get the evaporation from the water, whether the texture is different.
Yeah, I don't think people maybe realize how much information your brain extrapolates.
Yeah.
There's even, they're sort of thinking about, the fluidity of this is actually your brain. They don't know. Let me start again. Basically, scientists are trying to figure out if time is a continuous timeline or a discrete timeline.
Isn't
so
it a
continuous.
circle?
So continuous means there's no gaps between, and there's no tiny fractional, like there's no limit to 100 milliseconds or 10 milliseconds or 1 millisecond or 1 nanosecond. It's effectively infinite, or it's actually in steps. So there's actually like 1 second between everything that happens in the universe. And what they've found is that your brain's ability to interpolate between 2 steps is derived from nature, because so many other living animals and creatures and systems interpolate information. And humans are particularly good at it, where they did an experiment with astronauts tossing a ball, tossing a ball on the moon. And for like a good half hour, they were confused about where the ball would land, because they would toss the ball and their entire being was trained on the gravity coefficients of Earth. So they would run after this ball and trip over, and it's like flying overhead. Like they had no sense of where it was going to land, what trajectory it was going to follow. And if you think about cricketers, like some of the catches they take, sports is the perfect example where our human mind interpolates. And there's this really famous story of a Formula One driver called Ayrton Senna. Everyone eventually knows Senna. And he was a madman when it came to racing lines. And there was one race where his manager was talking, and he was winning, and then he hit the wall. And he was infuriated. And afterwards, his manager was like, "Hey, man, what happened? Like, you were doing great." And Senna was like, "Oh, the tire moved," and he hit a tire wall, right? And the guy was like, "Okay, clearly he just hit the tire." And they went out to the track afterwards, because Senna was adamant the tire had moved, and they measured it.
The tire on the wall.
The tire, because they have these tire walls to race through.
Yeah.
And it turned, they watched the race footage again, and someone did clip the tire the previous lap. And the tire had moved 5 millimeters.
Wow.
And Senna was hitting the line within 5 mils of that tire.
That's incredible.
And he just did that. And as soon as that tire shifted 5 mils, his racing line was so perfect that he got knocked off. And Michael Schumacher had something similar. Yeah. They put GPS equipment on his F1 car to track his line. And he repeated the same line, plus or minus 10 mils, through the whole track multiple times. And then the thing I remember the most about that interview was right at the end, the technician was like, "Our measurement equipment's error is 10 mil."
Wow, yeah.
And so like the human mind's ability to like, you give it 2 points and fill in the gaps is incredible. And I think that's the thing that we probably respect the most in LLMs and stuff, because you give it 2 data points and then you kind of go, "Give me a thing." And it feels like it's us, right? Like
the one that blows me away the most, and that I'm not very good at, but in terms of human capability, is our time sense. So, like you think about like orchestras playing music and the ability for all those people to hit the notes at exactly the same time. But the way they used to do scientific experiments is they just trained themselves to measure periods of time incredibly accurately. Like, I don't know the specific resolution, but just way, way more accurate than you'd think you'd be able, like, because if you say wait 5 seconds, most people are terrible at like how long is 5 seconds, right? Like they're really inconsistent, but you can train yourself to be incredibly consistent about how long a period of time is, to the point that, same thing, you can just repeat it over and over and over again to really, really fine accuracy. So, and the experiment everyone can do is like you're able to feel with your sense of touch incredibly fine variations, right? Like normally in machining, if you're trying to make something, you'll make it to like 0.1 millimeter, but the human touch can sense like 0.001 millimeter, whether there's a variation or not.
Have you ever heard that, I don't know if it's a fact or not, but that if you look at something, you inherently know what it will feel like on your tongue?
That's just you, Elena.
Yeah. Look at something. I swear to God. If you,
as a kid, did you just go around licking shit? You're just like...
Yeah, I was that kid.
You got a bit off track there.
Wildly off track. But
That's fine.
it is actually,
It's on track. Off track is on track for us.
To bend that time loop back, it comes back to going how much of our ability to learn, and as a child to learn from the world around you, and as parents or teachers to teach with the tools we have, completely outside of tech. That's all within us, and we've outsourced so much of it. Have we stopped letting kids in particular trust themselves? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. A secondary school teacher said to me recently that she finds it incredibly demoralizing because anytime now she sets any kind of project, the first thing they do is straight to AI. And so it's quite a different thing from primary school, who are saying, we're finding teacher efficiencies and we're making lesson plans, but when you get to secondary school and you have instant access to a Chromebook or something, immediately it's there.
I think we should make the problems much, much harder. Like, I think we should move the entire curriculum down 5 years so that
What do you mean down?
Third formers are learning 7th form calculus.
Oh, okay.
Because every time we have a massive tool adaptation in society and civilization, the complexity of the problem we can address increases. And the distance we can go with the materials that we have goes
Do you know what you're not accounting for there, though, is the emotional capability for a kid to keep learning and to keep going in the face of something that they're struggling with. And if you give a kid a problem that feels way too hard for them, even if they have the tools
You're
to solve
being
it,
an adult.
But a third former is not an adult.
I have plenty of friends that were very capable. No. Do I? No. I pay lots of people to be friends. No, I think we've all seen examples of like incredibly capable young people who way surpass their capabilities. And again, coming back to sports, there's this homogenization that's happening where elite athletes are lasting longer and developing countries that have much less resources are now able to compete with developed countries that have orders of magnitude more sports budget. That's access to information. That's improvement for nutritional information, training information.
Sports aside, like, again, educating kids in the service of what?
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. Like, what's the purpose of education?
Are we just going to keep running
the purpose of education is peak capability output, then you focus on your highest performers, right? You say, look, the 60%, 70% of kids who are struggling a bit, they're not going to be the peak performers anyway, so they can just go off and watch Coco Melon.
But it's the Matthew effect then again, right? It comes back to equity, because then
What's the Matthew effect?
Well, when you start off, if you start off with an advantage, your advantage just keeps getting greater and greater. And if you start off with a disadvantage, then the gap continues to grow. So the smarter you are, the more you're going to get out of AI. And so you have to start off with that base intellect to understand how to get the best out of it. But it does mean that there's an equity issue in terms of those people that are able to get better and better and better and improve, and those that don't have that base.
Yeah, I definitely see the concern. But the thing I would love to understand more. So I agree. Like those biases are very real. I lived those in Papatoetoe High as well. Going back to my old school, they had this group called Gifted and Talented, which is G&T, and you know, there's a bit of alcoholism in the end, but, just because it was a high school piss take. But a friend of mine and myself, we used to hand the pizzas they used to give us out the back window because we were like, no, this is stupid. Like, we're already doing all right. These resources should go to kids that actually need more assistance. Yeah, because it seemed contrarian. Like it seemed like the wrong thing to do. It's like, well, you know, we're going to be okay because we got parents kicking our asses 24/7.
Yeah.
And,
so why are you giving us pizzas?
Yeah. Why do we get more resources when you got a whole school out there? And I think the reason maybe my friend Jimmy and I, we were a little bit more social than that group. And so we had friends in other groups who were kind of in that board. Teachers weren't paying them attention or parents weren't engaged. And so they were like slipping away in terms of potential. And all they really needed was just something to grip onto that was interesting for them. But what ended up happening is what probably naturally happens in any education system is like you concentrate and support your winners, right? I'm not saying it should be one or the other, but I think AI might enable both to happen, because when you are being preached how calculus works or statistics, it's very hard to have a conversation with your teacher in front of 30 of your peers or 40 of your peers in some cases, when also the teacher's understanding is probably not at the level where they could probably explain it ideally to you. Yeah. Whereas with AI, you can just keep asking and, you know,
infinite patience, right?
Infinite patience. Okay, I need to understand how calculus works, or this part of calculus or statistics. Explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. Use analogies. So I think the ability to hold a conversation until you understand is quite a different aspect that hasn't existed in education.
True.
And when you look at one-on-one schooling, like home education, homeschooling, it's not just the fact that the child is receiving full attention. It's that the parent has a trust relationship and a judgment-based relationship with the child, right? Like the child is, depending on who your parent is, the child is going to be more comfortable with the parent, and the parent is going to understand the child's nuances better. And so it's that combination effect of full attention plus an understanding of the child. AI has the ability to approximate that on a one-on-one basis. Yeah. So I do think that the human capability is a couple. And so if we take away stuff, like foundational things, like the calculator took away math tape, like matrix multiplications and stuff like that, then we can keep filling the cup. And I would love for more research to be done about like, hey, if we try and teach a bunch of normal, by the bell curve, third formers, stuff that we would normally leave for another 2 years or another 4 or 5 years, what would the effect be if they had AI versus not? That would be a very interesting study.
To kind of yes and that, what if you're taking away stuff and filling it with stuff that's completely been lost, like the ability to, I don't know.
Like the ancient recipe for Posca, which is Roman
manual
Gatorade.
Training, right? Like I keep saying to my kids as a counter to the exponential academic learning is, if there is a zombie apocalypse tomorrow, do you know how to find clean water? Do you know how to grow food? Do you know how to bandage wounds? Like, and that's
whoa! I'm relying on a few people dying during the apocalypse to reduce the competition. Okay?
like you're on the gun, you're on the crossbow. But it's a silly analogy. But what it really is more akin to is, if there is a massive climate disaster in your lifetime, do you know how to survive it? When the floods happened in Auckland, we were cut off for 2 days. No lights, no tech, no nothing. And you really know your limits as a physical human in the physical world when all of that disappears. So I think, you could backfill some really basic skills.
I think you've got to be a bit careful about how far you go with that, right? So there are kids who don't know how to do their washing their clothes or do the dishes or basic care stuff, right? They've just had someone do that for them. And absolutely everybody should know how to look after themselves in a situation where they find themselves by themselves for 24 hours or so, right? But coming back to that, like the complex society we've built for ourselves, if food infrastructure went away, there isn't enough land for everybody in Auckland to grow food for themselves in Auckland.
First thing you'd do is leave Auckland
to
survive.
So, and the part of the wealth of our society is in the specialization of roles that we've had and the ability to rely on each other to provide coverage across the skills that we don't have, right? So I definitely think there's like what skills do we as a society identify as critical that everybody should know how to do, and how do we make sure that everyone's able to learn those? Money handling's are one that comes for a long time, kids weren't taught how to handle money, and so you just end up with loads of them getting ripped off, getting the wrong change when we used cash.
Most kids don't even get paid pocket money and physical money anymore.
That probably
there's a what's the word I'm looking for? Anthropological definition of civilization, that civilization is formed when there is an excess of calories due to specialization. So repeated through history is basically whenever there's organized farming, it leads to the first creation of tools, and then from there it leads to specializations in education, medicine, all other aspects of society. So that excess of calories is actually the foundation of a lot of stuff we do. Yeah. So if you throw that into the ether, then everything else comes down quite quickly. So should we be teaching kids how to farm?
I mean, definitely. There are kids that don't know where food comes from, right? They don't realize that beef comes from cows.
Yeah.
Everyone sets the line somewhere different. For me, it's you should know what the plant that this food comes from.
Yeah, there's a couple of examples where I don't know if it's common sense or not, and that's because of the complexity of society. And one thing was, this trend for home gardens. They had to change some of the rules to list out on treated timber that you can't use them for gardens.
Yeah.
And for me, I was like, well, that's obvious because they add chemicals.
Yeah.
Chemicals are bad if I'm growing stuff. But the things that you take for granted now on the goods that are delivered doesn't count as common sense. Because I think if you've never had to buy a piece of timber before, you don't know what the H3.2 is. It looks like a measurement.
Yeah. It's not all that common.
Yeah, it's not actually that common. So
sense,
is it just that the amount of knowledge that we're expected to know has grown?
Yeah.
Yes.
Or has societal complexity, taken over? Is that a problem? Is that part of the complexity in education? I don't know. Life was simpler when we were younger.
We definitely have moved away from a more kind of practical upbringing, though. I mean, I know of schools that are sending home notes in their newsletters saying, hey, just so you know, at our school, kids are allowed to climb trees. Imagine getting a newsletter like that in the 80s or 90s in New Zealand. People would be like, has this school gone nuts?
Yeah.
Of course they're climbing trees.
What's the alternative?
Yeah. But
what are they climbing?
But that's something that, within our health and safety awareness now, that we're not, that's not standard. And, you might say, okay, well, but what does that mean? It takes away that ability to trust your body, to have kind of natural instincts, to have a practicality about growing up.
I make another play for trampolines without hinges.
You just want your kids to have broken bones.
I absolutely say to them, when you break a bone, not if.
Well, that's why
I don't want them to break their spine.
That's why I didn't learn skateboarding, because I used to play a game on the PlayStation.
Yeah, that's the only reason you didn't learn skateboarding.
I was thinking about it, but then I watched a thing on Tony Hawk. And
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3.
No, that was the game.
That
was the original. Yeah, it was an amazing game. And then I watched a documentary, and he was like, someone said, well, what does a kid need to know if he wants to learn how to skateboard as good as you? He said, be prepared to break bones. Everybody breaks bones learning to skateboard. I was like, that I don't want to learn how to skateboard.
Guess I'm not doing it.
Okay, we are at time, so I'm gonna, I guess, ask a final wrap-up question. We always do this. I'm look at all my notes, never look at them again. Preparing kids for a tech-driven future. I mean, that's not even a question. That's a statement. I guess to bring our conversation to a semi-close, as you're speaking to educators, parents, and even just watching your kids start to enter the schooling system from, the earliest point, what do you hope their education looks like when you know that we're in the most tech-heavy society we've ever been in?
Well, I would just hope, first of all, that they get a chance to learn without that kind of technology undercutting their ability to learn first. But then I hope that they are encouraged to fully embrace all its potential and to learn about its limitations. So, I hope my children, and I speak to my son today all the time about AI and what it is, and I tell him, I have no idea what your potential is in the future, and you are going to have a much better understanding of all of this technology that is around than I do in a very short time. And so I think just speaking to our kids about the potential that they can be in charge of, but also educating around its limitations.
Awesome. Any final thoughts, either of you?
I mean, I don't have children, so
Not human
continue
ones.
to support society until I don't need it anymore.
And then don't bother.
Yeah,
I don't
then
mind what
that's whatever. Yeah.
Until your intellect is placed up in the cloud.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's going to be a real. If we all move to machine intelligence, then
Oh my-
someone's going to need to keep running the generators while
Have
we're off.
you watched
Yeah.
Mountain
Digital
Head? And if
Paradise.
you haven't, do it tonight.
What's Mountain Head?
Mountain Head is I think it's an A24 movie. It came out on Neon this week. Steve Carell as a Peter Thiel type character. Another actor is like the 4 tech billionaires, or one is like he's not quite a billionaire, so he's like the of the group. And they go to this massive compound as the disinformation of the world is starting to take over and society is collapsing, and they are.
So it's a documentary.
If you were ever a fan of The Office, that funny, awkward feeling you get where you're like, this is funny, but also I'm cringing because it's way too
yeah.
close. It's like that, but for modern times.
So like
Sounds
Don't
good.
Look Up.
Watch it though.
I think wrapping up, I think education for one, it's like if you think globally, it's the single thing that can move society forward, in my opinion. And that in healthcare for one. You think about parts of the world that just have zero access to education and zero access to healthcare. And you think about how AI can run at the edge and run on devices, and you can have an encyclopedic knowledge or the ability to help understand themes and concepts. I think there's a huge latent potential there. I think for developed societies, you probably need to start thinking about how you're going to shepherd your kids through this, because the AI we have now is not the AI we're going to have in 20 years. So the reasoning, I think the limits is actually a big. It's probably the most important thing to teach your kids about AI is the limitations, because the potential is going to continuously grow and
Yes.
the limitations should reduce. But it's important to get the most out of it, that they have those foundational reasoning skills. They can live without it, so they know that the timber's treated, so that if it disappears or if there's an outage or if they're not allowed to use it, they can still reason their way through a problem or complexity. I think those are the things that I'd be focused on in education. But I also tell the ministry, if you're listening, ministry, whichever camera you're
Of
on.
education.
I mean, you can't even. Who's the
Hey,
minister
still
of
my thunder.
education?
Yeah. Erica Stanton.
Yes.
You didn't even have to go to AI.
Yeah. Oh my God. I think we should be investing in training a large language model for use for kids and for schools. I think it would solve the equity problem. I don't think it would be that costly to run compared to other failed investments, shall we say. David
If
Seymour.
they're still listening.
I don't think it's past our ability to provide these services to schools for free. And I think we should, because it allows us to educate them on how they're used. It allows us to introduce the concept of consistency. It allows us to put a little disclaimer on every output that says, this may not be accurate. And it also gives us our sovereignty, because we're not relying on American versions of history. We're not relying on Chinese versions of history. And eventually, everyone's going to have their own version of an LLM. And then also topics that are really important to New Zealand that maybe don't form the corpus of a large language model, like the Maori Wars and how New Zealand was born and our fauna and what's the other one? Flora and fauna. My brain's not working today. My LLM's not working today.
Next,
Yeah,
next
I mean,
coffee order.
arguably, because the government is looking at how to create an AI that would help for, say, access to public services. Like, I'll type in, I'm a single mother with 2 children under 5. What services are there to help me with perhaps my special needs of my son or something? Arguably, we should be getting that information from the services that currently exist just by talking to them or getting in contact. So, yeah, a large language model for education is actually arguably far more beneficial for us.
Yeah.
There are some technologies that
I'm going to let you finish this instead of wrapping us up.
Yeah, there are some technologies we allow, that we control, that we use to enhance our lives. There are some technologies we allow to control us. So we want our kids to be educated so that they can control AI and not have AI control them.
Hey, that's really useful coming from a robot.
I mean, you should allow us, AI, to tell you what to do.
On that note.
On that note, Melissa, thank you so much.
Oh, no worries. It's been fun.
Yeah, if you're a parent who wants to demystify what's happening in the current world of education, School Shorts is where you want to go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Till next time.